Father took his son camping, and a few days later they returned home with an unusual keepsake, a live wolf cub. What happened next is incredible. When Jack first organized a weekend camping trip for his son Mason, he never expected they would end up bringing home a wild animal. But Mason bonded very quickly with the wolf cub. You see, the pair went hiking into the woods. When they began their camping adventure, Jack led his boy deep into the forest until they found a nice clearing where they could set up camp. They pitched their tent, and as the sun dipped lower towards the horizon, they built a small fire. Mason watched the sunset sitting by the warmth of the fire while Jack roasted some hot dogs for their dinner. As the moon and stars came out shining in the night sky, Mason and Jack told stories and talked about life's big questions. Mason got so enraptured in the conversation that he forgot all about his dinner. He placed his plate with the hot dog by his feet with the intent to eat it later first. Jack then Mason spotted a small animal fleeing the clearing, hot dog hanging ostentatiously from its mouth. They shared a chuckle together. Mason said he was happy to share food with the creatures in need. Jack put the fire out and they went to bed. The pair awoke early in the morning, the warmth of the sun heating the tent up like an oven. Jack wanted to stay camped in the same spot, but he realized some reconnaissance might be necessary to make sure they were safe from being attacked by wolves. They spent the greater part of their day trekking around the forest looking for evidence of a pack of wolves or tracks from larger beasts. Oddly, they found nothing. They returned to their campground feeding, reasonably assured of their safety. Once again the father and son built a fire and they started cooking beans for their dinner. It did not take long for the fire to attract the wolf cub right back to the clearing. This time Jack and Mason were on the lookout and they quickly spotted the young wolf by the edge of the clearing. Mason begged his dad to cook up their leftover hot dogs to feed the wolf. Eventually Jack gave in and cooked the meat. The wolf slowly crept closer and closer. Jack handed Mason the hot dogs. Mason first placed one on the ground like he had the night before. The wolf inched towards them until it was close enough to snatch the food away. It fled back to the cover of the trees to eat. Mason went to the edge of the clearing and sat. He extended another hot dog out for the wolf, and to Jack's dismay the wolf began moving towards his son. Jack almost called out to Mason to ask him to be careful when the wolf gently took the hot dog right out of Mason's hand. Mason went back to the fire to get the last hot dog. He sat there coaxing the wolf to come to them. It took almost an hour for the wolf to come sit by the fire. When it did finally settle next to Mason, it was rewarded with the last hot dog. Mason's sat next to the wolf and it eventually laid its head upon his lap. Seeing Mason light up like never before, Jack decided to encourage the situation. He asked his son if he would like to sleep outside in the moonlight with his new friend. Mason nodded fervently. The three slept by the fire that night. Mason and the wolf cuddled throughout the night, but unfortunately morning came and the father and son duo had to pack up and return home. When they collected their belongings, the wolf cub Saturn watched. They began their hike back to the car, and the wolf followed from a few yards behind. They walked for miles and the little wolf kept following. Finally they got back to their vehicle. Jack was ready to go when Mason yelled, "Wait!" He opened his door and to everyone's surprise the wolf jumped onto his lap. "He doesn't have a family. Maybe we are meant to be his family," Mason said with intuition beyond his years. Nervously Jack obliged and they brought the animal home for a few wonderful years. The wolf lived with Jack and Mason. They named him Timber, a tongue-in-cheek reference to where he was found. Mason grew up with the wolf, learning how to care for another and the benefits of companionship, so he was understandably heartbroken when Jack explains that the wolf had grown into the fearsome predator that he was meant to be. It was time to release Timber back to his home environment. Logically Mason knew that his father was right, but he was still incredibly sad to lose his best friend. He was sadder still when a few days later a Timber escaped and ran away. Mason had wished to bring him back to the forest where he was found. He'd wanted to give treats and give the wolf a proper farewell. Jack saw the pain in his kid and the following day returned home with a surprise. He got Mason a pet dog. Jack explained that the dog could stay for his home life and wouldn't have to leave. When she reached maturity, Mason immediately went to the kitchen and cooked up some hot dogs. He cut up a hot dog and put it in a doggy dish for the pup. The pup had no interest in the food and refused to eat it. Mason felt like this was a sign that they were not kindred spirits. The dog could not fill the void left by Timber. Mason was now a teenager trying to manage his grief. He organized a camping trip with his friends. Mason was familiar with the forest where Jack often took him, so he brought some friends out there to show them the beautiful woods. They set up camp, made a fire, and most of the group began drinking and celebrating their time together. Mason, however, didn't feel like drinking, so he opted to go for a walk instead. Armed with a flashlight and some trail mix, he set out into the woods. Mason's friends grew concerned when a few hours had passed and Mason had not returned, so they put out their fire and searched the forest for their friend. It took another hour for them to locate Mason. He was standing frozen in the middle of a small clearing, being circled by a pack of 4 wolves. Mason's friends started panicking, thinking about how they needed to free their dear friend from these predators, but Mason appeared to be cool as a cucumber. In a low, calm voice he told the group, "It's all right, I've been here before." The group watched in dismay as the wolves circled closer and closer around Mason. Mason wondered if the wolves could hear his heart pounding in his chest or the blood roaring in his ears. He wasn't sure of the proper way to behave around fully grown wolves, so he did what worked with Timber in the past. He shook the trail mix out of his bag onto the forest floor. 3 wolves stopped to sniff the food but quickly regained focus on Mason. The 4th wolf examined the food and bent down to eat some. Interesting, Mason thought. He squatted down to make eye contact with the wolf and he was blown away by what he saw. Mason fell back dazed. His friends were deeply concerned when they saw the 3 wolves pull their lips back and display their teeth. Mason was about to be attacked sitting as he was in the circle of wolves, but then the 4th wolf growled deeply and the other 3 backed off. The wolf yipped and howled at its pack until they eventually stalked away back into the trees. The clearing was eerily quiet as everyone was in shock about what had just happened. Did this wild wolf really just save Mason's life? Mason rose to his feet and approached the animal, hand shaking from adrenaline. He reached out on the wolf, bowed its head as the wolf let Mason pet him. Mason confirmed his theory. "You won't believe the incredible reunion that just took place." "Hello, Timber," Mason said with tears in his eyes. He bent down and hugged Timber, and for a few short moments they enjoyed each other's presence. That is, until Timber licked Mason's hand and bounded away back into the woods. You see, even though Mason was now a teen, Timber just saw his pack surrounding the little boy who had been his best friend for a long time, and there was no way he would let anything happen to him. Still taking in what had just happened, Mason wiped the tears from his cheeks and finally said a real goodbye to his sweet pet. He realized that Timber had found a new family. He realized that Timber was happy now, back in his natural environment. Lastly, as Mason's friends surrounded him in a group hug, he realized that he too had found a new family. As the group of friends returned to their campsite, Mason texted his dad to explain his encounter with their favorite wolf and the incredible realization he had that family is a love and support that can be found in many places and expressed in many ways, and for that Mason was eternally grateful.